Our planet is home to some very special places. In these unique spots, radically different worlds meet. There, cold meets hot. Jungle meets desert. North meets south. Opposing worlds are destined to live side by side, to discover each other, to share a strange and singular territory. In these places of encounters and collision, life proliferates in an unforeseeable reaction. These enclaves are laboratories where nature experiments with her inhabitants day and night. Every hour, every minute, every second. Here, life shakes things up with all its might. Sudden extinctions and new species, long-distance travelers, invaders and the invaded, ruthless competition and new opportunities. In these places, each living being plays its cards in a game of life and death. There are only two places that work as true connections between two worlds. The places that join North and South America, and Africa and Europe. These spots, located between two continents, are bridges. Strips of land that boast extraordinary and unique natural diversity. No engineer could imagine anything like it. Not even the boldest, or the most creative. No one would dare to think of building a bridge almost 1,900 kilometers long to span the sea and connect North and South America. This is the story of the wildest bridge on the planet and the secret of its prodigious biodiversity. It all began 80 million years ago in the burning heart of the Earth. Volcanoes emerged from the oceanic spine located between two tectonic plates and tossed up enough material to create a small archipelago south of North America. For many thousands of years, the volcanoes remained active, spitting up millions of tons of lava that formed the base of the future bridge. Several generations of volcanic islands appeared, one after another, succumbing to the erosive action of the sea and the tropical wind and rain. That first sketch of the bridge formed the pillars of the later structure. That was how the first phase of the construction of the Central American Bridge began. These volcanic islands became the home of castaways and adventurers. Nonetheless, it was hardly a pleasant destination. Volcanic lands are extremely harsh. Initially, they are pure rock, and very few beings are able to live there. But for some, volcanic regions also have their advantages. Those opportunists able to survive in such hazardous conditions christened the connection between the two continents. The species with the greatest mobility were the first to exploit the little virgin territories. It was relatively easy for marine animals. Such was the case of the crabs, which reached the islands washed up by the currents. Some species even use the rocks as shelter. It doesn't matter to many crab species if an island is deserted or if there isn't a blade of grass on it, because they feed on what the sea tosses up. Other species, like ghost crabs, need the waves to wear down and erode the volcanic rock to form sandy beaches. The organic material brought by the sea impregnates the minute grains of sand, and all the crabs have to do is filter it out mechanically each time the tide goes out. That provides them with all the food they need. Waste, algae, and dead animals washed up by the ocean were essential elements for life to flourish on those new little islands. The sea is a never-ending source of travelers. Some lead amphibious lives, and that allows them to make the most of the new land that has emerged from the sea and to expand their territory. Crocodiles, despite their ancient lineage and primitive appearance, are an example of such successful animals. Their bodies are perfectly adapted to the marine environment. Thanks to some glands located in the tongue that help them to excrete the excess salt that they absorb with their food or through the skin, allowing them to spend days and even weeks swimming in the ocean. Some species live in the marshes and even on islands, and are able to swim in the open sea. For that reason, it's very possible that they already lived in that first version of the bridge between North and South America. The beaches on tropical islands are also a powerful draw for other marine reptiles. It's likely that sea turtles, which need calm, safe places to dig the nests they lay their eggs in, were frequent visitors to the first islands that began to form the bridge between the two Americas. Their arrival on the scene represented a new source of natural wealth. Many of their eggs were lost, and so served as food for other new inhabitants that depended on the scraps and dead animals found there. Other pioneers arrived by air. Those birds that have adapted to life on the sea find big advantages in the desert islands. The islands offer them the chance to raise their chicks in a very safe and tranquil place, far from the dangers on the mainland. Brown boobies make their nests on bare rock. They don't need trees to put their nests in. A boobie's nest is made up of just a few branches where it lays and incubates its eggs. This adaptation allows them to colonize the bleakest and most solitary islands. Other seabirds, like the red-footed booby, need bushes or trees to build their nests. The bird colonies that settle on the little islands help to enrich the soil with their droppings. With the remains of the organic matter that they have brought to the island to eat and to build their nests with, and with their own dead bodies. Storing these materials makes it possible to feed the growth of new plants in the future. What's more, these birds serve as vehicles, as a means of transport for seeds, spores, insects, and small invertebrates that stick to their feathers or legs and hitch a ride until they land on these remote islands. Plants also look for new opportunities, and some of them are especially well prepared for sending their seeds on long journeys to places many kilometers away. The coconut palm is a good case in point. Its seeds, which float and are resistant to salt water, travel enormous distances on the ocean currents. Seeds from other trees are also able to travel from inland regions down the tropical rivers to the sea and eventually to the closest islands. This is the first scouting party ready to use the future bridge. The warm and humid climate and the rich volcanic soils, loaded with phosphates, potassium, and other minerals, will help the most adventurous plants grow. As the islands are gradually colonized and their surface becomes a richer and more complex ecosystem, survival there gets much easier for animals like bats, which are able to reach the islands thanks to their membranous wings. The warm reception of the pioneering trees and the diversity of insects on the island allowed them to survive with little difficulty. The construction of the first islands, the foundations of the Great Bridge, made it possible to establish primitive connections, drawing the living beings of North and South America a little closer together. The remains of the oldest islands, which date back some 80 million years, today form part of the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. Strange mists emerge from among the vegetation in the depths of the jungle. The sulfurous smell brings to mind witches and magic in sinister and dangerous places. But that's only in the imagination. Here among the dense vegetation, where the earth seems to breathe, nature flourishes intensely and peacefully. After many millions of years, the territory continues to evidence constant volcanic activity. The bailas, or pools of bubbling hot water, are yet more evidence of this grand construction destined to join the two continents. This is clearly seen in northwestern Costa Rica. The vaporous clouds that emerge from the depths of the jungle come from the muddy bailas. This is a phenomenon of volcanic origin. The high temperatures of the subsoil heat the water which emanates from the ground, dissolving the ashes and other particles and forming a thick, bubbling mud. The mud boils continuously at between 35 and 98 degrees Celsius and is very acidic. But even here, there are unique microorganisms that are able to withstand these extreme conditions and thrive. The volcanic remains mark the landscape and bear witness to a long history of fire and action. This is the most arid region in Central America, and its lowlands are covered with tropical dry broadleaf forests inhabited by a surprising variety of flora and fauna that are used to the dry climate and high temperatures. Under this vegetation consisting of scrub and large trees with spreading tops, the Great Bridge was built with immense quantities of volcanic matter. Today, the ecosystem that is growing on the old pillars of the bridge is quite singular. It's inhabited by animals and plants that are endemic to the area, but also by sojourners from both continents that continually cross paths here. White-tailed deer from the north share the land with pumas, which also came from North America. For thousands of years, they've been successfully staging the same life and death drama between predator and prey. Over the millennia, all they have changed is the scenery of the play, as both species and their ancestors worked their way south. Along the backbone of Central America rises the Cordillera Central, the central volcanic mountain range. There, while the cone of the Arenal volcano spits out burning rocks and blasts of smoke, at its feet, a jungle bursts with life. The volcanic matter that makes up the soil is a very rich substrate for the plants that grow on it. Volcanoes are often surrounded by varied and dense forests and jungles. As the volcano gradually increases in altitude, the ecological conditions of its terrain change. Clouds make the highest parts quite humid. The volcanoes in the regions of Guanacaste and Arenal in northwestern Costa Rica largely lie dormant. Today, only the smoking cones of some of the volcanoes allow us to imagine how this stretch of the bridge was formed. The second phase of the construction of the bridge was quite different. Some 30 million years ago, the Earth was heaved up from the bottom of the sea when the Cocos Plate and the Caribbean Plate collided. The pressure was so tremendous that the terrain was raised more than 3 kilometers in altitude. That was how the Talamanca and Tilarán Cordilleras were formed, the mountain ranges with the highest points in all Central America. The process in which internal pressures cause the terrain to fold and rise up to form mountains is called orogeny. Alpine orogeny, which created the Alps, the Himalayas, and the Andes, was also the process that formed the mountains of Central America and helped to build and finish the bridge. In a tropical setting of jungles and beaches, right in the middle of Central America, the mountains rise up more than 3,500 meters. Their peaks are often hidden in the clouds. Some of Costa Rica's highest mountaintops are home to cloud forests, very humid ecosystems that are also a bit phantasmagorical. The montane oak forests climb the slopes up to the highest and coldest spots. Their branches are always covered with lichens, ready to trap the water in the passing clouds. In this tropical region, the average annual temperature is no higher than 12 degrees Celsius. Few animals here are able to endure such low temperatures and so much humidity. Many of them are very colorful small birds that are in effect prisoners held captive by the heights. Below an altitude of 3,000 meters, the climate becomes a little milder. At an altitude of 1,500 meters, the bridge wears its friendliest face. The lowest summits are covered by very dense and extremely wet jungle. The almost constant rain and the very clouds themselves bring water relentlessly. The branches and trunks of the tall trees become aerial gardens, and every inch of their surface is occupied by epiphytic plants growing on them. Cloud forests are an extremely complex ecosystem that is very rich in plants and in animals that rarely set foot on the forest floor. Today, these mountains continue to rise in altitude 10 millimeters a year. There was still a third phase to finish the work on the Great Bridge, however. To finish the bridge, it was necessary to widen it. The final phase of construction was carried out with filler that came from the volcanoes and mountains. The tropical rains have always been very important to this region of the planet. Thanks to the abundant rainfall, the climate is humid and there is an explosion of life everywhere. Here, both the flora and the fauna have adapted to be able to endure the thunder showers and rainstorms on a very regular and bountiful basis. But the climate has played another fundamental role throughout the history of Central America. Thanks to the climate, the expansion of the bridge was completed, and the grand construction work came to an end. The truly intense climate of the tropics was decisive in adding huge shallow sections of the sea that were filled in over time. First, the power and intensity of the tropical storms eroded and washed away millions and millions of tons of soil and rocks taken from the mountains and volcanoes. Later, the turbulent waters of the rivers carried the gravel and stones to the coast, definitively reinforcing the land bridge. That's how the lowlands of Tortuguera were formed. Like almost all the eastern coastlands on the Caribbean side of Central America. Today, the Atlantic coast and its wetlands are covered with swampy forests that are flooded a large part of the year. The constant rain sends great volumes of water rushing down the rivers. In the regions near the sea, they form swamps and channels that cover huge areas of land. Here, there is a considerable diversity of amphibious ecosystems that are very attractive to the fauna. Geologically, it is a floodplain that was created when various river deltas merged. The channels sometimes change their paths because of the effects of the currents, the accumulation of debris, and the flash floods. The landscape is made up of dry meanders, old riverbeds, and oxbow lakes. The image that best defines this vast region is a giant labyrinth of channels surrounded by the jungle. Some birds, like the boat-billed heron, are exceptionally numerous. This nocturnal heron is the only member of its genus, and it is easy to recognize because of its oversized beak. During the day, it usually hides in the vegetation along the shore, but in the mating season, it gets little rest, fighting ritual duels on the edges of the breeding colony even during the middle of the day. The jungle and the channels are the most visible parts of the land bridge. A fluid relationship is set up between the two ecosystems, which various animals take advantage of. Ecological relationships are very complex, and the biological diversity here is amazingly rich. The top of that chain of relationships belongs to the great hunters and the carrion eaters. And among them, we find some very old species that were certainly pioneers in using the land bridge. The crocodiles drifting in the channels are able to catch prey of every size. They and the jaguars preside at the top of the ecological pyramid. But the crocodiles are more numerous and versatile. since they can also make use of the dead animals that float down the river. Today, the water in the riverbeds that flow into the Caribbean continue to deposit enormous amounts of material all along the coast. The land bridge keeps expanding little by little. Nonetheless, the bridge that joined the two Americas 3 million years ago also formed an impassable barrier between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The link between the two oceans was broken when the Central American land bridge was created. The consequences were immediate. The currents ceased to flow, and the environmental conditions on the two coasts abruptly diverged. The flow of marine flora and fauna between the two oceans was cut off, and each coast began to forge an independent history. The evolutionary processes quickly came into play, and soon clearly differentiated species began to appear on each coast, increasing the region's biological wealth. The Caribbean Sea is shallow and warm, with an average annual temperature of 28 degrees Celsius. Its waters are very clear and slightly saltier than those of the Pacific Ocean. It is a very stable ecosystem in a tropical environment. That's just what corals need to be able to grow. The numbers speak volumes. 14% of the planet's coral reefs grow in the Caribbean. The warm waters of the Caribbean are home to the flourishing Belize Barrier Reef and the Great Mayan Barrier Reef. These form part of the Mesoamerican Reef, the second largest barrier reef in the world, stretching more than 1,000 kilometers from Mexico along a large part of Central America to Honduras. Coral reefs are one of the planet's richest and most productive ecosystems. And farther south, in Costa Rica, we can also find some good examples of this ecosystem. Of the fish species man has identified so far, close to 450 live in the Caribbean, of which at least 123 live on the coral reefs at Punta Cauita. This peculiar Caribbean seascape takes the strangest shapes thanks to the 35 different coral species in it. The most abundant species here is the unmistakable elkhorn coral. Brain corals are also common here, and their convoluted shapes are food for thought. The sea fans sway to the rhythm of the waves, filtering out the particles suspended in the water. On the other side of the land barrier, the Pacific Ocean looks quite different. The currents are very important here because of their strength and variability. The Pacific is deeper and is subject to thermal changes related to the sea currents that cause the water temperature to vary. The climatological phenomena that alter the marine currents also cause periodic changes in the environment. In general terms, there is less biodiversity in these waters. Thanks to the nutrients brought by the ocean currents, however, the shoals of fish are more abundant. There is a trade-off: less richness, but greater abundance. It seems that the Pacific is always generous and does everything in a big way. The separation of the two oceans is noticeable in the fauna. The populations of sea turtles are clearly divided. The emergence of the Central American Isthmus was a key step in the creation of new species. The olive ridley and the Kemp's ridley are the smallest of all the sea turtles. They are very similar, but their areas of distribution are different. The olive ridley lives in the Pacific, while the Kemp's ridley lives in the Gulf of Mexico, where its numbers have dwindled dangerously. Genetic studies confirm that the two species are close relatives that descend from a common ancestor that inhabited the open seas before the land bridge was built. The two species are the only sea turtles that arrive on the beaches en masse to lay their eggs. The green sea turtle is more solitary and is divided into two subspecies that live in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, respectively, separated by Central America. Some scientists even consider them to be different species. Atlantic green sea turtles are numerous in the Caribbean, and their most important nesting area stretches along the beaches of Tortuguero, where the majority of the Caribbean subpopulation hatches. The abundance of food resources in the Pacific may have something to do with the presence of certain sharks. Since the interoceanic passage was closed off, the shark population ceased to be found all over the world and began to differentiate into distinct species adapted to smaller areas. The white-tip reef shark is a case in point, since it is distributed only in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The wall of the Central American land bridge prevented its expansion into the tropical waters of the Caribbean. White-tip reef sharks are found on continental and insular shelves at a wide range of depths. As their name indicates, they are very common near islands and on coral reefs. They spend much of the day lying on the sea bottom, when they might even seem harmless. During the night, however, they are anything but harmless. The white-tip reef shark feeds on a wide variety of fish. When it's time to hunt, the sharks grow excited and begin a sort of aggressive feeding frenzy, during which they may attack other sharks, which on occasion may be seriously injured. But let's return to the land, to the recently finished bridge. While the oceans have been separated, the two continents have been united. The colossal structure is impressive in size. 2,900 kilometers separate the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in Mexico from the Gulf of Darien on the northern coast of Colombia. Its outline is odd and sinuous, and curving and narrow at points. The broadest section is 480 kilometers wide, while the narrowest section is just 50 kilometers across. This new territory bears witness to the collision of two worlds. This is where the first clash between North and South took place, between their flora and fauna. Once the bridge had been completed, plants and animals started to invade the neighboring continent, and a silent struggle began in which all the living beings were put to the test. A continuous flow of invaders emerged as they sought new territories to live in. The fauna of South America discovered a new route to the north. Their eyes opened onto a vast territory full of opportunities. Monkeys, sloths, and hummingbirds opened a path in the jungle to conquer new lands beyond South America. The northern travelers also hit the road. One of the most awful aspects of the waves of invading northern species was the arrival of the big predators on the southern continent, where previously no large carnivores had lived. The result was the extinction of many species that were unable to defend themselves from the claws and teeth of the big cats. And like them, less than 20,000 years ago, another very different animal arrived in the area. An animal which, in a very short time, would change the face of the earth and also of the Americas. This great work of nature, the narrow land bridge that joins the two Americas, has become a unique region where there are always new travelers, and where life is able to conduct experiments with all its creative force.